Most people ignore a message from an unknown number at 2 o'clock in the morning, but one text sent by mistake was about to change 2 lives forever. Ava Brooks stared at the cracked screen of her phone as rain tapped softly against the apartment window. The digital clock in the corner glowed 2:07 a.m., painting the small living room in a cold blue light. Her leg throbbed with pain after a terrible accident earlier that evening, and every attempt to stand sent another wave of discomfort through her body. The apartment felt unusually quiet, the kind of silence that made every second feel longer than it really was. Her charger had stopped working hours ago, and the battery icon blinked red. 3%. That was all she had left. She reached for her phone again with trembling fingers. There was only one person she wanted to contact, one friend who lived across town and had promised she would always answer. Ava opened her messages, her vision blurring from exhaustion. She typed slowly, carefully, forcing herself to stay focused. "He broke my leg. Please help." She pressed send and exhaled. For a moment, relief washed over her. Then she looked at the screen and felt her stomach drop. The name above the conversation wasn't her friend's name. It wasn't anyone she knew. Somehow, in her panic, she had sent the message to the wrong number. Ava closed her eyes. Of all the mistakes she could have made, this felt impossible. The battery dropped to 2%. She considered sending an apology, but before she could type another word, the screen lit up. A reply appeared almost instantly. "Don't call 911. Stay where you are. I'm coming." Ava froze. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Every muscle in her body tightened. Who answers a stranger like that? Who reads a message from an unknown number and responds as if they already know exactly what to do? The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the glass with silver lines. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed through the city. Ava read the message again. "Don't call 911. Stay where you are. I'm coming." There was no greeting, no question, no confusion, just certainty, the kind of certainty that felt unsettling. Her heart pounded. She typed a response. "I think you have the wrong person." The typing bubble appeared immediately. Then another message arrived. "No, I think you need help." Ava stared at those words. Whoever this person was, he sounded calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that belonged to someone accustomed to solving problems. Someone used to being obeyed. Another message appeared before she could decide what to do. "Are you alone?" Ava looked around the apartment. The dim lamp beside the couch flickered softly. The storm rattled the windows. Her battery dropped to 1%. She swallowed hard. For the first time that night, she realized she was no longer thinking about the pain in her leg. She was thinking about the stranger on the other side of the screen. And hundreds of miles away, in a private office overlooking the lights of Chicago, Ethan Kong lowered his phone and stared at the message from the unknown number. The room around him fell silent. Something about the fear hidden between those 6 words felt impossible to ignore. The city stretched beneath Ethan Kang's office in a sea of white and gold lights, rain washing across the floor-to-ceiling windows 38 stories above downtown Chicago. Around the long black conference table sat 8 men in tailored suits, each waiting for instructions that could move millions of dollars before sunrise. Nobody spoke. Nobody checked a phone. When Ethan Kong called a meeting after midnight, people listened. Yet at that moment, the most powerful man in the room was not looking at financial reports or security briefings. His attention remained fixed on a single message from an unknown number. He read it again. Then again. "He broke my leg. Please help." The words were simple, but something about them felt real. There was no drama in them. No attempt to persuade. Just fear compressed into 6 words. One of his executives cleared his throat carefully. "Mr. Kong." Ethan did not answer immediately. His dark eyes remained on the screen. Finally, he set the phone on the table. "Continue without me." The room instantly fell silent. Several men exchanged confused glances. Ethan never walked away from meetings. Not once in the past decade. Yet he was already standing. "Sir, is everything all right?" asked his chief of security, Daniel Cho. Ethan picked up his coat. "I need information on a phone number." Daniel blinked. "Now." Ethan's expression never changed. "Now." 5 minutes later, they were alone in a private operations room hidden behind his office. Multiple screens illuminated the darkness with soft blue light. Rain tapped against the glass while analysts worked quietly from neighboring stations. Daniel handed Ethan a tablet. "The number belongs to a prepaid account. Registered less than 8 months ago. Ethan studied the limited information. Female, 26 years old. Southside address. Employment records scattered across several caregiving agencies. Nothing unusual. Nothing remarkable. Yet his instincts refused to let it go. His phone vibrated again. Another message from the unknown woman. I think you have the wrong person. Ethan typed immediately. No, I think you need help. The response had come naturally, almost before he thought about it. That bothered him. Logic told him to ignore the situation. Common sense told him to call emergency services and move on. Instead, he found himself asking questions. Are you alone? He waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Finally, the answer appeared. Yes. The single word settled heavily in the room. Daniel watched Ethan's face carefully. You believe her. Ethan looked out at the storm. I do. Why? For several moments, Ethan said nothing. Then he remembered another rainy night more than 20 years earlier. A frightened immigrant boy sitting alone at a bus station. Cold. Hungry. Invisible. One stranger had stopped to help when everyone else walked past. He had never forgotten it. Ethan returned his attention to the screen. The battery indicator beside the conversation disappeared. The phone was dying. Time was running out. Then a final message arrived. It was not a plea. It was not a request. It was simply an address. Ethan stared at it for 1 second before turning toward Daniel. Get the car ready. Daniel's eyes widened. You are going personally? Ethan slipped his phone into his pocket. His voice was calm enough to chill the room. If she sent that address, she trusted someone would come. He started toward the elevator. And I do not intend to disappoint her. Ava Brooks had spent most of her life believing that if she worked hard enough, stayed kind enough, and kept her head down, life would eventually become easier. For a while, it almost had. 3 years earlier, she had accepted a position caring for elderly residents through a home assistance agency on the south side of Chicago. The pay was modest, the hours were long, but she loved the work. She loved listening to stories from people who had lived through decades she could only imagine. She loved being the person who showed up when someone felt forgotten. That was how she met Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, an 82-year-old widow with silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and a stubborn streak that made every nurse in the city nervous. Eleanor lived alone in a small brick house surrounded by rose bushes. She still insisted on watering herself. Ava visited 5 days a week. At first, it was just another assignment. Then it became something more. Eleanor reminded Ava of the grandmother she had lost years ago. They shared coffee in the mornings. They argued about old movies. They laughed over crossword puzzles neither of them could finish without help. In a city filled with strangers, Eleanor became family. But outside those peaceful afternoons, Ava's life was far less stable. Bills arrived faster than paychecks. Rent climbed higher every year. The old sedan she depended on seemed to develop a new problem every month. Then there was Derek Miles. When they first met, Derek had seemed charming, attentive, protective. He remembered birthdays, opened doors, asked about her day, the kind of man who made promises easily. Over time, however, the warmth faded. Conversations became criticism. Encouragement became control. Every decision seemed to require his approval. Ava kept telling herself things would improve. She believed difficult periods happened in every relationship. She believed patience could fix what stress had damaged. Most of all, she believed people could change. Tonight, lying alone in her apartment while rain battered the windows, she was no longer sure of any of those things. Her phone screen had gone dark after sending the address. The battery was dead now. The silence felt heavier because of it. No more messages. No more reassurance from the stranger who claimed he was coming. Ava shifted slightly and winced. The storm outside intensified. Wind rattled the glass. Somewhere down the hall, an elevator door opened and closed. Every sound made her heart jump. She glanced toward the front door. What if the stranger never arrived? What if the messages had been a mistake? What if she had trusted the wrong person? Yet another thought lingered in the back of her mind. What if he actually came? Hundreds of miles away, Ethan Kong sat in the back of a black SUV, moving through sheets of rain. City lights blurred across the windows. His security team monitored routes and traffic updates, but Ethan barely heard them. His attention remained on the file, now displayed on a tablet. Ava Brooks, 26 years old. Caregiver. No criminal history. No outstanding debts beyond student loans and medical expenses. ordinary in every measurable way. Yet one detail made Ethan sit forward. A listed emergency contact from years ago, Eleanor Whitmore. The name struck him like a forgotten echo from another lifetime, and for the first time that night, something deeper than curiosity appeared in his eyes. The name refused to leave Ethan's mind. Eleanor Whitmore. He stared at the tablet while rain streamed across the SUV windows in shimmering ribbons of silver. Daniel noticed the change immediately. In 15 years, he had learned to recognize the rare moments when something truly unsettled Ethan calm. "You know her," Daniel said quietly. Ethan did not answer right away. The city blurred past outside. Finally, he nodded once. A long time ago, 23 years earlier, Ethan had arrived in Chicago with his mother carrying 2 suitcases and less than $200. They knew no one. They spoke little English. During their first winter, the heating in their apartment failed for nearly a week. Snow piled against the windows. The temperature inside dropped low enough that Ethan could see his breath in the mornings. His mother worked double shifts at a laundry service and still struggled to afford groceries. One evening, an elderly woman from the neighborhood knocked on their door carrying blankets, canned food, and a small space heater. She returned again the next week. Then the week after that. She never asked for anything. She never expected repayment. She simply helped because she saw people who needed help. Ethan never forgot her kindness. He never forgot her name. Eleanor Whitmore. The SUV accelerated through the storm. Ethan looked again at Ava's profile. Caregiver. Emergency contact listed as Eleanor Whitmore. The connection was impossible to ignore. "How far?" Ethan asked. 21 minutes, Daniel replied. Ethan checked his phone. No new messages. The silence felt wrong. Meanwhile, Ava sat motionless on the floor of her apartment. The storm had knocked out power in part of the neighborhood. Outside her window, half the building across the street disappeared into darkness. The only light came from occasional flashes of distant lightning and the emergency lamp mounted near the kitchen counter. Shadows stretched across the walls. Every creak of the old building sounded louder than it should have. She kept staring at her dead phone as though willing it to come back to life. The stranger's final message echoed in her thoughts. "I am coming." Nobody had ever said those words with such certainty before. Not family, not friends, not Derek, especially not Derek. For years, she had been the person who solved problems for everyone else. The person who stayed late. The person who checked in. The person who carried responsibilities nobody noticed. Tonight, she was the one waiting. Waiting for help. Waiting for proof that she had not made a terrible mistake. Then she heard it. A key turning in the building's main entrance downstairs. Ava's heart immediately began to race. Residents came and went all the time, but something about the sound felt different. Deliberate. Measured. She listened carefully. Footsteps echoed somewhere in the hallway below. Then silence. Complete silence. Across the city, Ethan's phone suddenly vibrated. One of his analysts had discovered something new. Daniel opened the report and frowned. "Sir, you need to see this." Ethan took the tablet. A security complaint had been filed from Ava's address 3 months earlier. No charges. No follow-up. No resolution. Just a brief note from a responding officer. The words were short, but they made Ethan's expression harden instantly. Someone had asked for help before, and nobody had come. The report remained on Ethan's screen as the SUV cut through the rain-soaked streets. Someone had asked for help before. Someone had documented concern. And somehow the situation had simply faded into paperwork and silence. Ethan closed the file and looked out the window. Chicago blurred past in streaks of amber and white light. For years he had built a reputation as a man who solved problems quickly. Yet tonight he could not shake the feeling that he was already late. Daniel watched him carefully from the opposite seat. "There is more," he said. Ethan looked up. "What else?" Daniel handed over another page. It contained a list of recent communications connected to Ava's emergency contact history. Most were ordinary medical appointments and caregiver schedules. One entry, however, stood out. Eleanor Whitmore had updated her 6 months earlier. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Why is that relevant? Daniel hesitated. Because Ava Brooks was listed as a beneficiary. The interior of the SUV became very quiet. Ethan read the line twice. Not because the amount was significant. It was not. What mattered was the meaning behind it. Eleanor Whitmore trusted Ava. Deeply. The elderly woman who had once changed the course of his own life had chosen to include this young caregiver in her final plans. That told Ethan more about Ava's character than any background report ever could. Meanwhile, inside the dark apartment, Ava listened to the storm and tried to stay calm. Minutes felt like hours. The emergency light near the kitchen cast long shadows across the room. She thought about Eleanor. Every Wednesday afternoon, they shared tea while discussing books. Every Friday, they watched old movies together. Eleanor always said that character revealed itself during difficult moments. Anyone could be kind when life was easy. True character appeared when helping someone offered no reward. Ava smiled faintly at the memory. Then her smile faded. She wondered what Eleanor would say if she could see her now. Probably something practical. Probably a reminder not to panic. The old woman had a way of making impossible situations seem manageable. Another gust of wind rattled the windows. Ava glanced toward the dead phone beside her. She still did not know who Ethan Kong was. She did not know why he believed her. She did not know whether he was actually coming. Yet for reasons she could not explain, she believed he was. Across town, the SUV finally exited the expressway. Daniel checked the navigation screen. 7 minutes. Ethan nodded. Then another message arrived from one of his analysts. A photograph appeared on the tablet. It showed Eleanor Whitmore standing in her garden last summer. Beside her stood Ava Brooks, smiling while holding a basket of freshly cut roses. The image had clearly been taken during an ordinary afternoon. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. Yet Ethan stared at it longer than expected. Eleanor looked happy. Ava looked genuinely happy too. The photograph captured something rare. Trust. Daniel studied Ethan's expression. You think she reminds Eleanor of someone? Ethan shook his head slowly. No. He looked back at the picture. I think Eleanor saw something worth protecting. The SUV turned onto Ava's street. Rain hammered the roof. Apartment buildings rose from the darkness ahead. Then Ethan noticed something that immediately changed his expression. The lights inside Ava's building had gone out completely. Every window was dark. The moment the SUV stopped at the curb, Ethan opened the door before the driver could reach it. Rain soaked the shoulders of his dark coat almost instantly. The apartment building stood ahead like a shadow against the storm, its windows dark and lifeless. Daniel stepped beside him, scanning the entrance. Backup is 2 minutes out. Ethan shook his head. 2 minutes is too long. They crossed the street quickly. Water rushed along the gutters while distant thunder rolled across the city. Inside the building, the emergency lights cast a faint red glow over the lobby. The old manager sat behind the front desk with a flashlight in his hand. He looked up nervously as Ethan approached. Power outage? Daniel asked. The manager nodded. Half the block lost electricity 20 minutes ago. Ethan showed him Ava's photo from the tablet. Have you seen her tonight? The manager adjusted his glasses and immediately recognized her. Miss Brooks. 3rd floor. Sweet girl. Always helps the older tenants carry groceries. Ethan exchanged a brief glance with Daniel. The description sounded exactly like the person Eleanor Whitmore would trust. Did anyone visit her apartment? Ethan asked. The manager hesitated. A man came by earlier. I did not get a good look at him. He seemed upset about something. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. And afterward, nothing. It has been quiet since then. Upstairs, Ava remained alone in the darkness. The storm had become louder. Wind pressed against the building, making the walls creak softly. She had managed to pull a blanket closer, but exhaustion was beginning to cloud her thoughts. Every minute felt slower than the last. She glanced toward the front door again. Part of her still wondered if she had imagined the entire conversation. After all, who changes their plans in the middle of the night because of a message from a stranger? Yet something deep inside refused to let go of hope. Then she heard a sound. Not from outside. Not from the storm. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Steady. Drawing closer. Her heart immediately began to pound. The footsteps stopped outside her apartment door. Silence followed. Ava held her breath. Seconds passed. Then there was a gentle knock. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just 3 calm taps against the wood. She stared at the door, unable to move. On the other side of it, Ethan waited. He had climbed 3 flights of stairs and followed the apartment numbers until he found hers. The hallway light flickered above him. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the worn carpet. For the first time all night, uncertainty touched his mind. What if he was too late? What if she no longer trusted anyone enough to answer? He knocked again. Ava. His voice was calm and steady. My name is Ethan. You sent me a message. Inside the apartment, tears filled Ava's eyes before she even realized it. Not because she was afraid, not because she was in pain, but because after hours of darkness, uncertainty, and silence, someone had actually come. Ava tried to answer, but emotion caught in her throat. For several seconds, she could only stare at the door while tears blurred her vision. On the other side stood a man she had never met, a stranger who could have ignored her message, deleted it, or assumed it was somebody else's problem. Instead, he had crossed the city in the middle of a storm. Ethan waited patiently. He did not knock again. He did not rush her. There was something unusual about his calmness, as if he understood that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. Finally, Ava found her voice. The door is unlocked. The handle turned slowly. Ethan stepped inside, followed by Daniel a few moments later. The apartment was small but neat. Books lined a shelf near the window. A framed photograph of Ava and Eleanor Whitmore sat beside a lamp that no longer had power. Ethan noticed the picture immediately. Ava noticed him noticing it. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside filled the silence. Then Ethan looked toward her. You should be seen by a doctor. His voice was exactly the same as it had sounded through the messages. Calm. Direct. Certain. Ava nodded weakly. I know. Daniel moved quietly toward the kitchen and used his phone to contact a private medical team. Ethan remained where he was. He did not crowd her space. He did not ask intrusive questions. He simply made sure she was all right. After a few moments, Ava finally asked the question that had been haunting her since the first reply appeared on her screen. Why did you come? Ethan glanced toward the photograph again. I knew someone once who taught me that helping people matters. Ava followed his gaze to the picture. Eleanor. For the first time, something softened in Ethan's expression. Yes. Ava blinked in surprise. You know her? Ethan looked around the apartment as though searching through old memories. A long time ago, when my family had nothing, she helped us. Ava stared at him. Eleanor had told countless stories over the years, but never once had she mentioned Ethan Kong. Then again, that was exactly the kind of thing Eleanor would do. She had never helped people for recognition. She helped because she believed it was the right thing to do. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, the room felt strangely peaceful despite everything that had happened. The fear that had dominated the evening slowly began to loosen its grip. A few minutes later, Daniel ended his call. Medical transport is on the way. Ava released a breath she did not realize she had been holding. Ethan nodded once. Problem solved. Yet he did not leave. His attention drifted to the photograph again. Eleanor and Ava standing together among roses. One woman who had changed his past. Another who had cared for her when she needed someone most. Suddenly, Ethan understood why Eleanor had trusted Ava enough to place her in her will. Kindness recognized kindness. It always had. And as the rain continued to fall beyond the darkened windows, none of them noticed that the events of this night were only beginning to reveal a much larger story than any of them imagined. The medical team arrived less than 15 minutes later. Their professionalism surprised Ava. There were no unnecessary questions, no judgment, no confusion about payment or insurance. Everything moved with quiet efficiency. As they carefully prepared to transport her, Ethan stepped aside and spoke briefly with the lead physician. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Whatever was said, the physician nodded immediately. Ava noticed it, but said nothing. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken. Rain still fell across the city, but the violent wind that had rattled the windows for hours had started to fade. It felt as though Chicago itself was exhaling. By the time they reached the private medical facility, the eastern horizon had begun to lighten with the first signs of dawn. Ava had not slept. Neither, apparently, had Ethan. While doctors completed examinations and imaging tests, he remained in the waiting area overlooking a quiet courtyard. Most people would have left by then. Most people would have considered their responsibility finished. Yet Ethan stayed. Daniel eventually approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. You have meetings in 4 hours, he reminded him. Ethan accepted the coffee without looking away from the window. Reschedule them. Daniel almost smiled. You have canceled less important meetings before. Never all of them. Ethan said nothing. The truth was difficult to explain. The previous evening had started with a wrong number. It should have ended there. Instead, Every step forward seemed to uncover another connection to Eleanor Whitmore and another reason to remain. Several hours later, a physician entered the waiting area. "She is going to be fine." Ethan nodded once. Relief appeared briefly in his eyes before disappearing behind his usual calm expression. "Good." The doctor smiled. "She is asking for you." Ethan followed him down a quiet hallway lined with soft lighting and framed artwork. When he entered the room, Ava was sitting upright for the first time in hours. She looked exhausted but noticeably better. Sunlight filtered through the window behind her, painting the room in warm gold. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ava smiled. "I guess I owe you an apology." Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. "For what?" "Sending a message to the wrong person." To her surprise, the corner of his mouth moved into the faintest hint of a smile. "You sent it to exactly the right person." The room fell quiet again. Ava looked down at her hands. "I still do not understand why all of this happened." Ethan considered the question carefully. "Neither do I." That answer made her laugh softly. It was the first genuine laugh she had managed since the night began. Then her expression became thoughtful. "Eleanor always says life changes because of small decisions. Tiny moments nobody notices at the time." Ethan looked toward the morning sunlight beyond the glass. "She is right." Ava followed his gaze. Somewhere across the city, Eleanor Whitmore was probably watering her roses and preparing tea without realizing that two lives she had touched years apart had unexpectedly collided because of her kindness. Neither Ethan nor Ava understood how important that connection would soon become, but both of them could feel it. Some stories begin with grand plans. Others begin with a single message sent by mistake and a stranger who decides not to look away. 3 months later, spring had returned to Chicago. The gray skies of winter had given way to warm sunlight, and the rose bushes outside Eleanor Whitmore's house were beginning to bloom again. Ava moved carefully along the garden path, no longer needing assistance. Recovery had taken time, patience, and more determination than she thought she possessed, but she was walking again. Eleanor sat nearby beneath a large maple tree, watching with obvious satisfaction. "I told you that you were stronger than you believed," she said. Ava laughed softly. "You tell everyone that." "Because it is usually true." The old woman adjusted her sun hat and smiled. "People spend too much time underestimating themselves." Life had changed in ways Ava never expected. She had returned to work gradually. She spent more time with friends she had neglected. She stopped apologizing for taking up space in her own life. Most importantly, she no longer carried the exhausting belief that she had to solve every problem alone. Some lessons arrived gently. Others arrived in the middle of a storm. A black sedan rolled slowly to the curb in front of the house. Eleanor noticed it first. "Your friend is here." Ava followed her gaze. Ethan stepped out moments later. Despite everything that had happened, she still found it strange seeing him in ordinary daylight. Men like Ethan Kong seemed designed for newspaper headlines and whispered rumors, not peaceful afternoons surrounded by flowers. Yet over the previous months, he had visited Eleanor several times. Each visit revealed a side of him few people ever saw. The powerful businessman who commanded respect across the city became a grateful young man whenever Eleanor offered him tea and homemade cookies. "You are late," Eleanor announced. Ethan checked his watch. "By 4 minutes." "Exactly." Eleanor pointed toward an empty chair. "Sit down and explain yourself." Ava smiled as Ethan obediently took the seat. Watching the exchange never failed to amuse her. Few people on earth would dare speak to Ethan that way. Fewer still would get away with it. The afternoon passed quietly. They talked about books, neighborhood gossip, and Eleanor's ongoing battle against squirrels that insisted on stealing birdseed. Ordinary conversations. Ordinary laughter. The kind of moments people rarely appreciate until they become memories. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Ava and Ethan found themselves standing near the garden gate. The air smelled of roses and fresh grass. For a while neither spoke. Then Ava looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan nodded. "Why did you really come that night?" He studied the garden before answering. "Because 23 years ago someone helped a frightened boy when she had no reason to." Ava immediately understood. "Eleanor, you never forgot." "No." His answer came without hesitation. Ava smiled. Neither did she. Ethan looked back toward the house, where Eleanor sat peacefully among her roses. The woman who had changed his life had never asked for recognition. She had never expected repayment. Yet her kindness had traveled through decades, reaching people she would never meet and shaping futures she could never predict. Ava thought about a dying phone battery, a wrong number, and a message sent into the darkness. One small mistake had led her here. Sometimes life changed because of plans. Sometimes it changed because someone chose to answer when they could have ignored the call. Ethan looked toward Ava. Ava looked back at him. And beneath the golden light of a Chicago evening, both understood the same simple truth. Kindness never truly disappears. It simply waits for the right moment to come home.